All right, welcome to the Armchair Commanders podcast. My name is John,
And I'm Jack.
and this week we are reviewing the 2019 film Midway. This film was requested at by our special guest this week, Charles, who works in the or is involved in the museum field and very specifically deals with military aviation. Charles, it's nice to have you with us. If you want to say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Charles Gray. I am a demonstrator at the National Museum of World War II Aviation. I've been a volunteer there since 2019, and the museum is located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, near the airport. And the most amazing thing about the museum itself is we have a collection of over 20 aircraft that are fully restored and flying, including the Dauntless Dive Bomber, which was a starring aircraft in this movie.
And you guys also have a B-25 there that was also shown briefly in this film as well, right?
Yes, I believe that, and that B 25 was also seen in the movie Pearl Harbor and a few other movies. I think there was five different aircraft carriers that this B 25 has landed on or taken off from in the course of its career.
It's pretty impressive. So, how did you get him? How did you get started with your involvement with the museum?
Sure, it was really my son's interest in military aircraft that we were in the museum a lot, and one of the main directors of the museum was demonstrating an N3N biplane flight simulator. And after talking for about half an hour, we were voluntold that we should be coming in and taking an active role in volunteering at the museum. And from that point on, we demonstrate such items as a Link trainer, which is the world's first flight simulator, and also the N3N, which is now a fully functional flight simulator using Lockheed Martin flight simulator program, and it's actually unique because there are potentiometers on all the controls that actually control the flight simulator. So as you fly the plane, you're actually flying the plane in the flight simulation program.
I remember because me and my father had come down several weeks ago and checked it out. I remember that being quite impressive. Uh, how long was that simulator that you usually demonstrate? Is it was it in pretty good shape to begin with, or did the museum have to go through like a whole restoration process for that as well?
So the actual airframe was an actual training aircraft in World War II. It was the last biplane that was used as in the Navy and the Marine Corps to train soldiers before World War II and throughout the entire course of the Second World War. We eventually got the frame of the aircraft. It was actually on display and used at the Naval Academy for quite some years. And then it was a crop duster. Eventually ended up in our museum. And then we actually had a team of engineering students come by and build that flight simulator. And then during COVID, we expanded the screen. So we have three large flat screen TVs on the flight simulator. So it's almost like an IMAX effect. And we had a gentleman who was another volunteer who also built flight simulators for NASA, redesign and calibrate it to bring it up to a very high standard. So the flight simulations, we've had a lot of pilots who got on there flying fighter jets and bombers, and he said it was just like flying a real plane, just not leaving the ground.
It's nice. So I know when we were first talking, there was quite a few films that we had discussed possibly doing, and we settled on Midway. I guess my first question in regards to the film is what drew you to this movie for a discussion?
Sure. As far as movies go, I guess we could use Pearl Harbor to contrast. Sadly, use Pearl Harbor to contrast this to Midway. I think Midway did a really good job of trying to de-Hollywoodify these events, but also try to make it understandable for how significant this literally one day was in history. This is the single event that changed the course of the war in the Pacific, and it was really down to just a handful of pilots and a handful of planes that somehow were in the right place at the right time, and they were able to sink four Japanese carriers that were involved in the attack in Pearl Harbor. And that, and coupled with the fact we have an actual Dauntless dive bomber at the museum, was another reason why I thought it was a good museum movie to pick that would tie it into the museum as well.
Okay. So, Jack, what did you to get the ball rolling on our discussion of this film? What do you think of this film?
I'm conflicted. You know, just I so excuse me. A little bit of backstory of me in this film. This was one of the movies that I tried to watch right when the COVID lockdowns were happening, and I had literally nothing better to do than watch this movie, and I still turned it off and walked away.
What
Just,
what
just
about it left that sour taste in your mouth the first time around?
namely, the overuse of CGI, of bad CGI. Usually, I'm one of the defenders of CGI, I will admit, but Jesus Christ. And Ed Skrine's accent, if you can even call it that.
I will I will say the acting in this film was interesting because it seemed like, with the exception of like Woody Harrelson, Dennis Quaid, and Patrick Wilson, it seemed like everybody was trying to do like a 1940s like New York, like, "Hey, I'm walking here" type uh accent, and it kind of just, that aspect of it came off as kind of fake for me.
Yeah.
Um Charles, what'd you think about that?
Unfortunately, actors will be actors, and there's always bad accents. I guess I was trying to compare. And this is a very tough film to do. I mean, I guess we can compare this to. Let's see, when was the other Midway made? Let's see.
I think it was like 70s or 80s
Right,
was what
and
was when that one came out.
right, and there's a lot of stuff in that movie. For example, they use Texan trainers painted as Japanese Zeros. They're using modern Essex class carriers as the carriers,
Right.
for the replacing the Yorktown. But as far as CGI goes, I think it's a definitely step in the right direction compared, especially to Pearl Harbor, where they had moments of CGI that were okay and pretty interesting, and then they would go flash into them bombing retired Navy frigates from the 70s, you know, and God knows who gave them permission to do that. But it was, I think Pearl Harbor was a flawed film in a lot of ways, but just how they would back and forth between, historically accurate looking battleships sinking at Pearl Harbor to, ships with missiles on it. And unless you actually know, the common public wouldn't, understand the difference. With this movie, at least they were trying to get the basic facts right. Um, but is it a perfect movie? No. I agree with you.
And that was why I was conflicted, is because I did some research on it, and it is in fact one of the more historically accurate war movies, surprisingly.
Right.
Yeah, there's so many great individual stories in this film that they chose to showcase and portray. And it's like, I think a good example is one of the earlier scenes in the movie. uh I believe it was one of the Devastators that was landing on the carrier, which that is an airplane that you almost never see in any kind of World War II film. So I love seeing that in this film. But there's a scene where one of the Devastators comes to land on the carrier and it lands too hard and the torpedo comes loose from the airplane and it skids across the deck and like this guy jumps on it trying to slow it down. And because of the CGI, it it almost looks comical, and because of how it visually looks in this film, you're like, this is so fake. This is just, a stupid Hollywood moment. And then you hop on the good old Google machine and you find out that, like, yeah, there's multiple instances during the war of ordnance coming loose off of aircraft when they land and they're just like skidding across the deck. They're like, oh, I guess this isn't made up.
Right, and there are some good scenes in there. I'm trying to remember the very beginning of the movie, but there was a scene at Pearl Harbor. They had the aircraft from the Enterprise flying over trying to land, and they were shot at by our own forces because they were just trigger happy at that point. Anything that flew had to be Japanese at that point, and I think that's a part nobody I think had seen before, or really, unless you read your history.
Right. And it's an interesting point because I hadn't realized that during the Pearl Harbor attack that there were carrier planes that were coming in to try and land at Pearl Harbor in and about that time. I knew that one of the reasons why the Japanese aircraft were able to more or less sneak in is because the radar operators at Pearl Harbor was expecting like a large flight of like B-17 bombers to be coming in. So when they saw a huge dot on the radar, they're like, "Oh, that's our guys." But I didn't realize that there were also carrier aircraft from our own people that were trying to land at that time also.
Correct. Yeah, and that's I think it was a flight of B-17s coming in from California that they thought it was on the radar as well. Um, but yeah, I mean that's a good point too. The movie does show some stuff that was pretty amazing, and I think one point that let's see in the movie, what's this guy's name? He was the let's see the Richard, the guy who played Richard Best, or Dick Best. He's I think the only pilot in history to ever hit and help sink two aircraft carriers in the same day, which was pretty amazing. And you think that might be exaggerated Hollywood stuff, but it really actually did happen. And supposedly he was one of the best naval aviators we had back then. He graduated Annapolis in 1932, and but he was kind of portrayed as a cowboy. But in reality, he was a very methodical and professional pilot. But once again, Hollywood had to have you know some kind of conflict. They had to make him an interesting character.
Right. Like, and him being involved in the sinking of two different carriers definitely comes off as that kind of like main character energy. It's like, oh yeah, this guy, like, it's kind of like when you see, I don't want to compare too much to Pearl Harbor, but it's like when you have Ben Affleck, be in the Battle of Britain, then he's at Pearl Harbor, and then he's in the Doolittle raid. Like, it kind of comes off that way a little bit, where it's like, of course, our main character is everywhere.
Exactly.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't doubt for a second a guy named Dick Best sank two ships in one day.
I'm sure it's never reversed either. So
He strikes
right.
me as a guy that probably has like a giant like eagle tattoo on his chest.
That's not at all where I thought you were going with that.
Corncob pipe. Where did you think I was going with that? Oh,
Anyway, yeah, this movie was great.
Right, and we did get past the that's the other thing I forgot about the because I did watch the 1976 movie, a long time ago, and this is the era of model ships blowing up, and it's kind of like almost Godzilla esque, destroying the factories, but that's what they had in 1976. They didn't really have anything to actually sink. But it brings me back to another movie that was out there, Dunkirk actually did sink a ship in that movie. That was a movie that was really bent on realism. They actually had, I believe, replica or not. They actually had Messerschmitts 109s because the Spanish military had those as well, and I think the Swiss had Messerschmitts. But and that was part of the process. Is like we wanted it to be as real as possible. So I believe they actually sank a old trawler in that movie that looked like a hospital ship. If you remember that scene.
I do. We haven't reviewed that film yet, but I did see that film in theaters, and that was a very big moment for that film.
Yes,
Which it's it's interesting because it's interesting to see how different directors and how different films choose to divert their money and how they choose to portray certain things. Obviously, it's probably easier for Christopher Nolan to get a hold of a big ship and paint a red cross on it and be like sink it, okay, versus Midway. There's no way for them to actually sink a carrier for the sake of their movie.
correct. Although I think there
Um,
there was one movie that actually did try to sink an ocean liner called the Ile de France, and it was a spectacular from the 70s. It's not a war movie at all. It's some kind of hokey movie, but they partially sank the ship. It was going to be scrapped anyways. It was a ship built in I believe the 30s, and on the way to scrapping, they filmed this movie and they blew up the ship, knocked the stack down. I've never actually seen the movie, but it wasn't very good from what I heard.
I uh, I will say, kind of going into our next question, but one of my favorite scenes in this film was towards the end, when the Japanese are abandoning the carrier Soryu. Um, you see the fires are raging on the decks, and you get the very heroic, like, I'm going down with my ship, and then everybody else hops off, and then you have random Japanese destroyer, send out torpedoes to scuttle their own uh, carrier. Uh, and for me, I found that, one, it was a good visual moment, but I also appreciated it from the standpoint that a lot of times Hollywood movies tend to portray the Japanese in a very over stereotypical fashion of just being like uber fanatical, uh, kind of thoughtless robots who, you know, are very focused on, like, Hollywood's big on the, like, they'll fight to the death kind of narrative, which, the Japanese military was a very big, like, fight to the death type force. But that particular scene for me was very humanizing towards an enemy that we don't normally do that for in film.
Right, and just the fact that they're a different mindset. That like you said, maybe not the Soyu, but the Hairu. I don't even know how to pronounce these carriers' names, but the admiral chose to go down with his command when it was scuttled. Everybody wanted to stay with their ship, and that was historically accurate. I mean, they basically had two missions. One, get the picture of the emperor off the boat intact, and two, you go down with your command. Um, and it was probably a bad policy because how are you going to learn from your mistakes if you lose a ship, you just decide that's game over, and now I'm just gonna I'm going out with my ship, going down to the bottom of the ocean.
Right. Which is also it's interesting because we see that kind of moment portrayed where you have the super higher ups say, "I'm going down with the ship," and then you have kind of like the lower level, one of the lower level officers say, like, "I want to stay with you," and he has to like give him an order, like, "No, you have to survive and keep fighting this." Like, you are of a high enough rank that you're important that we still need to use you, but you're not high enough that the like honor system isn't applying to you yet.
Correct. Right. Or, I guess it's it's about it's always about example and it's sacrifice, and somebody has to witness the sacrifice. Otherwise, there will be
Yeah.
no stories to be told. So,
Jack, what was your favorite scene in this film?
Probably Bruno being a badass one last time before they sent him to the drowned god.
oh, when they captured him and they weighted him down, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I guess they're not One Direction fans.
that's
Or
true.
Jonas Brothers fans, that's right. I get my boy
Jonas
bands
Brothers.
confused.
Well, there's so many of them to keep track of.
There's one less now.
And I believe that was historically accurate. They didn't like taking any prisoners, especially anybody who was involved sinking their aircraft carriers. They were throughout the war. They considered being captured dishonorable, so they would help you with your honor by killing you.
Right.
So
They're the problem.
helpful.
Yes.
The when I was reading about it was apparently there's only two discrepancies in the way that the movie show this, and both are pretty forgivable. Which is, the first one is they didn't use an anchor to weigh him down. They like took an empty fuel can and punched it full of holes so that it would fill with water and then drag him down. But they didn't like bring him on the ship and then immediately toss him back over. They kept him for like 2 weeks and tortured him for information and then tossed him overboard.
Right. And once again, they've got to speed up the storyline a little bit. Um, Talking about the real Bruno, I believe his name is Jardo, Gaido. Um, there's a scene where he actually on the Enterprise saw a plane about to hit the ship, got into a Dauntless. In the back, there's a 30 caliber machine gun, and he from the plane cockpit he shot down the plane. In the movie, they promoted him on the spot. In reality, he was scared crapless because he was just basically flight crew on the deck. He wasn't a pilot, and he thought he was going to get in trouble, so he ran away from the admiral, and they had to find him, hunt through the ship to find him to promote him. So, but once again, they had to speed up the storyline.
I could definitely see that, just like stuffing yourself. It's like somebody stuffing themselves inside of their locker to hide from a high school bully. It's
Exactly.
like it's like you can't find me.
Correct. Let's see.
Charles, what was your favorite scene in this film?
It was probably when they sank the carriers. I mean, that's always been, and just to make sure this is war. People forget people died on both sides, and this is a horrible event. But from a purely patriotic American, we have to win, and the Japanese were coming after us. It gave me, it was just amazing to see, Americans come back and help turn the tide of this war, and sink in an incredible sequence, and people forget how incredibly lucky they were to be, at the right altitude with the sacrifice of all the torpedo squadrons ahead of them, pretty much to zero, survivors, except for I forget his first name, but it was like Insignia Gay, who watched the entire thing from his life jacket in the water. But to draw the fighters, the combat air patrol down, and to get everybody looking at the water here for the torpedo bombers, and just at the right moment, here comes all these Dauntlesses, and they fly in there and they sink every visible carrier they can see, and that was just an incredible moment for me in that movie.
Have you ever seen Team America World Police?
More times than I care to admit, but yes.
So we have a recurring statement on this show to sum up what you were saying, which is you're a fan of the carriers being blown up because that's an America fuck yeah moment.
Exactly. Team America, America, fuck yeah, going off to blow up the motherfucking world. Which, only puppets can show that movie accurately. So I'm glad they
Right.
chose marionettes for that.
The only possible medium they could have portrayed it.
Yes, especially the sex scenes, which reminds me, is has anyone made it yet to Casa Bonita since the new opening?
I have not. I I've tried to get because it's ticketed now because it's so popular.
Correct.
I've not been able to get a ticket since it's opened.
And I'm not even in the same state.
So, for those who are unaware and who are South Park fans, Casa Bonita is real. It does exist. Most of the things in South Park, the cartoon series, is about Colorado, like American warehouse furniture. I think there's an episode about cracks and hose there. But the Casa Bonita is a restaurant that's in the suburbs of Denver, and they include incredible things such as cliff diving and endless sopapillas and Black Bart's Cave, and it was featured in an episode of South Park. During COVID, they were out of they filed for bankruptcies, and then Trey Parker and Matt Stone bought Casa Bonita, and I believe they spent $40 million
Oh,
restoring it.
they dumped a lot of money into that
A
place.
ton of money, and I think they had to repaint the outside like 6 or 7 times to get the right shade of pink, but it's basically a Mexican restaurant that is, I think, described as the most exciting restaurant the greatest restaurant in the world, and it is now open, and they're slowly rolling. It's a soft opening. I'm on the website right now. I'm just trying to see if I can get a ticket. But it's all
Good luck.
yeah. I've already put like my email in here like 2 or 3 times, and I have not gotten the ding for it. It says exclusively from your email list. Yeah, it hasn't changed since this summer, but people apparently have flown across from around the world to try to get in there, because they have a Cartman's party room. They have the bear man pig walking around apparently from one of the
Man Bear Pig.
yes, the bear man pig. So
I'm
along with
super cereal, guys. You need to get the sopapillas.
yes, you have little flags on your tables you raise, and you get sopapillas anytime you want. But it's basically an all inclusive meal where I think you pay. Let's see, it's $40 per ticket, and you get a meal. It doesn't include beverages, but it's all the sopapillas you want. And then you get to see cliffside diving, and
You're paying for an experience, not the food.
right, it used to be
Let's
really,
get that out there. Like,
but apparently it's supposedly way better than it was before. It's not gourmet, but it's definitely a huge improvement from Taco Bell on a plate.
right. I so I want to say maybe about a month ago, um, I had to go up into the mountains for my job, and I didn't realize the route I was taking, but the route I was taking drove me right past the South Park Coney Island.
Okay.
Um, and so when I saw that, I'm like, all right, well, I got to stop. And it was hilarious because it's just like the way they portrayed it on the show. It's a giant building that looks like a hot dog. Um, Walked in, got my hot dog, ate it, and I was talking to the dude that was like working the counter there, and the place was legitimately for sale. And I am beyond shocked that the guys at South Park have not purchased that place. Um,
Right. This should be in the parking lot of of Casa Bonita.
Right. But the thing that blows my mind, and it might blow your mind because you understand what the housing market is like, or just the, you know, how insane real estate is here currently.
Mm.
So the property was 2 acres up in the mountains, and it is right next to a creek. It's a very scenic area. Um, you get the restaurant that's world famous now because it's been featured in South Park, but you also get an adjacent building that operates at currently as a junk shop. So you have another commercial space. You get 2 commercial spaces on 2 acres that is next to a creek, and this commercial space that's next to the Coney Island also has 2 apartments above it.
Okay.
And they, when I was talking to the dude that was working the stand, he's like, "Yeah, they want 2 million for it."
Wow. Yeah, I actually remember driving by this now. It was, I think it's on 285, I think.
Which is like, it's insane to think because like you'll know if you look at like a 3 bedroom house on the south side of Denver, like in Highlands Ranch, you'll pay $1 million for that house with like 0 yard and like all that stuff. And like here's a business that already has built-in advertising for itself, just going for 2 million with the acreage included.
Right. It's pretty impressive. But once again, it shows that everything in South Park is probably real in a very small way.
It makes me think that maybe we should review the Whale Wars episode sometime as a bonus reel.
That's true. All right.
Whale wars, where stuff actually happens now.
Right. Yeah.
But anywho, returning to our movie discussion, I think another great like America fuck yeah moment in this film is when they do demonstrate the Doolittle raid. Um and it's such a small piece of this movie, but when they do the set piece of Dennis Quaid acting as Admiral Halsey, you know, he does his little spiel. He's like, I gotta get us as close to Japan as possible so they don't crash, but I gotta save the carriers. Um, and and it's immediately followed up by Aaron Eckhart, walking out on the deck. That's like, we're probably not going to make it. Who wants to still go? And then they all still step forward, and the very next scene is the bombers, dropping their loads on Tokyo, and you see like the Emperor being shuttled down into a bunker. Like, I thought that was a great addition to this movie.
Yes, I agree. It was because you start with Pearl Harbor, you get to the point where it's kind of like a low point. You get to Midway, and then we see us striking back and right back at the heart. And it really, that raid actually changed a lot. Because I believe, let me think if I got my timing and my sequence right. That raid happened before Midway. And because of that raid, Midway happened. As I'm sure you folks know, because they were saying, "Hey, those carriers are still a threat. We know it came from a carrier. We have to go get those carriers." And if it wasn't for the Doolittle raid, there would be no Midway.
It's also just a super impressive, it's an impressive story in its own right. And there is a as far as I remember, there is a movie about it, which is 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, but it's been showcased in a couple of other films. Um, Notably Pearl Harbor. I know I said I didn't want to compare this film to that, but it is what it is. Um, which it's a shame that I have to say this, but I feel like Pearl Harbor did the B-25 launch scene better, as just because they were using real aircraft. It looked more impressive.
Right.
That being said, Pearl Harbor wasn't as accurate, just like it wasn't as accurate in many respects. But like I appreciated in this film, the Doolittle raid actually shows like, oh, they're launching it in the middle of a storm. You know, I also thought it was interesting that it was done from the perspective of the aviators from the Enterprise, not the Hornet. And they're standing on the deck taking bets. They're like, oh, they're not going to make it. As like rain is pelting them in the face. Like it was an interesting perspective to view that moment from.
Right. And a few historical things, just because our museum does have that B-25 that is was used in the movie Pearl Harbor, along with several others. I can't remember how many, but they one of the things was interesting is those bombers were equipped originally with Norton bomb sights, and as you know, Pearl Harbor actually showed that scene pretty well. They said we have to strip this down, make it as light as possible. They took out the machine guns, put black painted mop broomstick handles out, and pretended they were machine guns. But they also took out the Norton bomb sights, mostly because they're afraid they'd be captured. And they made some very simple line of sight. It was just basically imagine something with an arc and a swinging pendulum in there, so you can kind of gauge your fall of the bomb. And one of our volunteers is actually recreating the bomb sight they used on the Doolittle raid, and our museum is also working on some great computer simulations. We have a bunch of engineers from Colorado Springs, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and there's actually going to be a simulation where you can drop a bomb like in a Doolittle raid. So
I
that's
would I would pay a good chunk of money to do that if we're being honest. Like if you told me that like I could step into like a mock B-25 cockpit and like flight simulator the Doolittle raid, I'd drop like $100 on that like in a heartbeat.
yeah, it's gonna be more on like a flat screen kind of thing, but you're still
Okay.
gonna have like the same controls as you would in World War II. They're gonna rig those up. It's still a work in progress. The engineers are figuring out how to do that. Um, the other neat aspect that we have is we have what's called the Link mod, um, where we have the original 1943 Link Navy simulator trainer, where you sit in there and it's like run by organ and player piano parts. It was built in the 1930s and it's all 100% analog. The engineering students about 3 or 4 years back, they took another Link box and they digitalized it, and now it's sitting in front of 3 monitors, and you'll actually be able to sit in this Link trainer and fly different aircraft. We've got it rigged up now so you can be in a pontoon, an N3N with pontoons on it, and take off from Pearl Harbor and just fly around, Hawaii inside that plane. So these are going to probably be up and running in the next month or so.
I'll definitely have to make another trip down then.
Yes. Yeah, it'll be
Um
great. I'll let you know.
but your description of like the Doolittle raid thing that you guys are working on, it reminds me a lot of for I think it's one of the commemorative Air Force wings. I think it's the one that operates the C-47. That's All Brother, but they have it's um it's like from the cockpit section forward they have like a DC-3, and basically you can step into the cockpit, and I don't know if it's necessarily a flight simulator, but it's like just like an experiential thing where you sit down in the pilot seat and then like the plane shakes and they project like flying over Normandy during the invasion on the screens.
Hmm. Let's see.
It's
Yeah, no, never been into that one yet. I went down to there is an airport near Phoenix or outside of Phoenix, and they do have a C-47. That was interesting because they used that C-47 actually to take pilots out of it was at the time it was it Yugoslavia back then? I can't remember. But it was like Serbia, and it was where a lot of downed pilots from raiding Romanian oil fields ended up getting get crashed their planes or trying to fly back to Italy. And he had a couple hundred pilots in this one area that all the partisans against the Germans at the time gathered, and they actually flew they flew a diversion raid, and he took all these C-47s out to pick these pilots up, and he rescued a couple hundred pilots. And if you give me a second, I think it's called Operation Marlin Spike or something like that. But it's another interesting thing where, once the little bit of history you don't know. But yes, the Confederate Air Force. And well, by the way, another plug for the museum here was just announced that we're going to have first of all, there's going to be another air show in Colorado Springs. It's going to be in August of 2024. It's going to be the weekend of the 16th, 17th, and the 18th. They just announced that they are going to have the Navy flight demonstration team, the Blue Angels, here. And I believe it might be the very first time they've ever been to Colorado Springs. So
I
that's
was going to say they're kind of stepping in on the Thunderbirds territory.
true. Yeah, I think we just couldn't get the Thunderbird. We had the Thunderbirds maybe 5 years ago, but it was something where there's a lot of naval aircraft at the World War II Museum. We've got Corsairs. We've got these things called Tiger Cats, which are twin engine fighters. They never used them in World War II, but they used them in Korea and even Vietnam, along with the two Avengers, and we also have the Dauntless dive bomber as well, and there's a few other planes as well. But that's a pretty cool thing that's going to be happening, and they're flying. They fly F-18s versus the Thunderbirds F-16s, so a little bit
Right.
different aircraft.
So, Jack, what was your favorite performance in this film?
Hmm. I liked the. I already forgot his name. The dude who played Night Owl as the
Patrick
inform.
Wilson.
Patrick Wilson as the information officer.
That was definitely I did like that. I think I think this is going it might be an unpopular opinion, but I th- I think one of the biggest downfalls of this film is that I appreciate all the stuff that they showed and demonstrated, but I think because they tried packing so much stuff into it that it ended up kind of taking away a little bit from each thing. I think if this film was very much focused on like imagine if I loved how this film opened up where we had Patrick Wilson discussing with Admiral Yamamoto um, pre-war where he's like, hey, if X, Y, and Z things happen, this is going to be the outcomes. Like if we get our oil cut off, we're going to go to war, which is a gross oversimplification of the Pacific conflict, but it was a big part of it. Um, I think this film could have been great if it was like almost took like if you've ever seen the film The Imitation Game, where it's very focused on code breaking the German Enigma code.
Right.
If this was if we had Patrick Wilson talking to Admiral Yamamoto, and then we have just big picture Pearl Harbor scene, and then we have him do some more exposition in a code room or in board meetings, and then we see big picture Doolittle raid, and then all the scenes with like him and Woody Harrelson going back and forth, where he's like, "How do you know they're going to attack here?" Like, I think if we had used Patrick Wilson and Woody Harrelson and all these other like high level actors or characters as our exposition or narrative from point to point, and then we had kind of just these big set piece battles, I think that would have made this film like infinitely better. Not that I didn't appreciate, you know, like the story of Dick Best or uh, I'm not going to try and pronounce Nick Jonas's character's name because I'll probably ruin it. But even then, you know, we get the moments where it's like we get all this banter with Nick Jonas, and then he hops into an airplane and he's hero of the day for shooting down a plane attacking the carrier. But he still stands before uh, Halsey and gets promoted in that scene, and it's like we still could have had the scene where, you know, imagine that scene where we're up like in the control tower of the carrier and Halsey's looking down and he sees a dude hop into an airplane uh, and does his heroic thing. He's like, bring him up here. And then we meet our hero. I think that, like, I think the switching between the multiple different levels of people kind of took away from it a bit. So I think for me, if we had just kept it as Patrick Wilson and Woody Harrelson as our primary characters who are narrating in between big moments, I think that could have done a lot for this film.
Right. I guess what we're looking at is the hardest job in any movie job is the editor. And besides the story writers to get to that point, I mean, we're talking about 6 months of like a very active war where you're zooming around the Pacific. I think they even had parts of it where they're at Coral Sea, if I remember right. Um, so, and I'm thinking of like other shows' attempts at trying to change up the storyline. I mean, you have once again to use Pearl Harbor is almost like they spent too much time in the moment. Like everything is like we're going it almost by minute when the base was under attack. Then you have like shows like the Pacific where I remember they would start off where they would just basically show a map of the ocean and they would just kind of zoom in on an island and it was kind of great because it kind of set the scene like where the heck is this place and they zoom in there and then of course you've got Nolan's film with Dunkirk, which was like three different timelines overlapped on each other's. I think the planes were it was the guys on the ground were 1 week, the guys in the boat was 1 day, and then the guys in the plane was 1 hour. So, and they somehow and that was an incredible editing job to splice that all together and to make an incredible story. So of all the movies I think that was out there, I think we have there's definitely you have to do Jonathan next one on Dunkirk because I think that was one of a great film that was kind of overlooked. I think.
Yeah, it was. It did, you know, it did get its Oscars, but it was definitely more of that like summer blockbuster, and I think kind of gets pushed aside because I'm trying to remember. Did Christopher Nolan also do 1917?
Good question. Just Google away at that. Oh, while we're looking that up, so Operation Halyard was World War II, July 1944. They rescued 432 U.S. and 80 other Allied prisoners flown out of what was then, Serbia, and that was one of the most amazing, covert rescue operations of the war. And and I never even heard of it until I went to a Confederate, not well, I guess it's commemorative Air Force now. It used to be Confederate Air Force down in Arizona, and they actually had survivors from that event and family members from Serbia who were there who helped build the airfield, which was pretty amazing.
Okay, so that was another one of those, you know, one of the infinite stories of World War II that kind of gets pushed to the side.
Correct. Yeah, and there's no movie, and there's like a memorial there. I think that's about it. So, what was the question again? Who was what?
Director of
Oh
Dunk
yeah. Oh,
or
the Nolan.
1917.
Yeah. Oh, the actor was he in 1917? Nolan. See 19.
No, Sam Mendes. Huh. Very
Okay.
similar style.
Well, that's
So,
go ahead.
I was going to say, what did you think of? Because one of the big reason, or being your area of knowledge, what did you think of the portrayal of the aircraft in this film?
Well, that's actually probably one of the best parts of this whole movie. They having CGI. I mean, not to use the world of anything like tanks, planes, ships, warships, because a lot of people use that as history, and a lot of those ships are made up or don't look the same. But a lot of the footage, I mean, if you look and pause the movie, they're painted just like they were in as they were in World War II. They had the right numbers on them. They had the right paint schemes on them. They flew in formation at the right time. Their aiming devices were spot on. Um, they had the dive brakes, the 30 caliber in the back. Um, I think they did a pretty good job with the actual aircraft. And I can't tell you offhand. Maybe one of you two know if they actually used any actual aircraft in the movie.
Um, I honestly don't know the answer to that because I feel like um they were so reliant on their CGI that I think it would kind of make me upset if they actually did have access to airplanes.
I'm looking it up right now. I mean, I know in the once back to Dunkirk, they did use like actual aircraft, Spitfires. There's a bunch of Spitfires left in England that are still flight worthy. I mean, there's probably a couple replicas in there. And then when they didn't have that, they actually used a lot of models, like RC models of Spitfires. Um, so that was, I know for that show. Let's see, but you were probably right. They might have had a cockpit built or something like that, so you can do close-ups. But I don't think they used Dauntlesses for real in that movie. But I'll
Well,
keep
there's
looking.
there's so few of them. So,
Right.
Jack, what are you drinking this evening?
I am drinking the Fanta Zero Sugar Mystery Drink
Very nice.
and
What
and a
is
Guinness.
what is a mystery flavor like?
Well, you see, it tastes like a mystery. Mm.
It's like Scooby.
It's very fruity. Yeah, no sugar, no caffeine, perfect soda for a night.
With a Guinness chaser.
Yep, E2.
I uh I went for the losing team in this movie. I'm having myself a nice tall can of Sapporo.
There you go. Along with some sushi would be perfect.
It was it was the last thing I had in my fridge, and I was like, oh, it's fitting enough for the film. So,
Good, good.
what are you having to drink this evening, Charles?
Well, I had two choices. There was a salty crew, which I've never seen or heard of before. I think I got at a Costco this summer, and I still have a couple left. It's described, quote, as a boat beer, and surprisingly good and not filling, and one of my actually favorite drinks, but I've never seen it again. But I switched gears and I went for Cayman Jack. I stole one of my wife's. I think I'm drinking the pina colada version of that. They're actually really interesting mixed drinks in a bottle, but they usually need another shot of some other form of alcohol to bring it up to
To where you want to where
adult
you want it.
drinking strength. We'll call it. Yeah. So, but it's not too bad. Cayman Jack is definitely good.
So I think it's about the time that we give this film a rating. So, Charles, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but we try and do a individualized rating for each film, just to keep things a little fun because we think the 1 to 5 star system is a little boring.
Sure.
Uh, so we like to have a little fun with it. Jack, what do you think an appropriate rating for this film should be?
Hmm.
What's our standards here? We're using
Oh,
like
we go
Rotten
all over the
Tomatoes.
place.
Oh, okay. it's
We usually do 1 out of 5 inside joke from the movie.
okay. Yeah,
Hmm.
I
I
got
personally I was thinking maybe like 1 to 5 soda burned lungs.
there. You go.
1 to 5 soda burned lungs. I'm gonna give this 2 soda burned lungs and one's crispy out of 5.
Okay. And what is your basis for the 2 and 1 crispy lung rating?
Like I said, Ed Skrine's attempt at an accent, the CGI, the pacing felt really fucking disjointed at times.
I will
But man,
say
the last
it.
hour or so of this movie is not bad.
Oh
You
yeah,
know, the actual Midway battle.
yeah. Once we get into carrier sinking, it's like, all right,
Yeah.
You, Charles?
Charles,
Yeah.
one to five, one to five
First.
lungs.
Okay. Just cut this in later, but I'm actually just found something. So this is I don't even know yet. Something from the UK. They said that none of the historic aircraft carriers or planes at the time are still in their wartime condition. Well, considering that either they're sunk or scrapped, I think the only aircraft carrier to survive any of this was the Enterprise, and the Enterprise was supposed to become a museum ship, was in New York City until 1950 almost, and then he eventually just ran out of money and they scrapped it. But the conning tower apparently is still somewhere in New Jersey. Um, the interesting thing to say here is that and TBDs, the Douglas torpedo bombers, could not be found anywhere. Well, obviously that's not true. We have one in the museum, so they were all CGI to look like. So just to close that loose end. As far as I was going to use a different kind of phraseology, I was going to use carrier sunk. So I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
You can do that too.
I'll give it a 4 out of 5 carrier sunk. I still think they, I appreciate the effort. They did really work hard. There's definitely some blemishes in there of acting and changing things up, but I still remember sitting in there going, that's about right, as far as, and way better than the 1970s reproductions of Pearl Harbor and Battle of Midway. They were, at least they're trying to make the aircraft look like they were, and they didn't have CGI in the 70s. But I'll give it. I will give it a little. I will give it 4. We used to call this in the fire department when I was a volunteer there, crispy critters. So we got 4 crispy critter carriers, and sadly, there are a lot of crispiness going on with those carriers because they all burned and sank. So, all right, what about you, Jonathan?
I like the rating because it matches the number of carriers lost.
Exactly. That's the other popped in my head there. 4 Japanese carriers scratched.
I uh I feel conflicted. I I do like this film. Like the history nerd in me is really appreciative of all these different little stories that they told. Um I also it hits me right in the typical dude like action film like yeah. Uh but also there's the like the critical movie reviewer side of me is like this CGI is terrible. Um, it's we had another film that we described as fun but not good. Um, I would say this almost lands in that category for me. I want to give it. I'll give it 3 out of 5. So I'll split the difference between you two because I did enjoy this movie, but there are things that are left to be desired.
Okay. Well, 3 out of 5. You've got to give some more adjectives on that.
Okay, 3 lungs that are soda burned, and I'll give a carrier that's currently on fire but hasn't fully sunk yet.
Yeah.
So it's like a 3.5.
There you go. 3.5. Severely damaged, but not mortal yet. It'd be like the Yorktown, until it got hit by 17 torpedoes from the, and also sank a destroyer at the time too. Forget about that. Did accurately put that in there, I think. Not the 17 torpedoes. It was only 3, I believe.
Right. So Jack, what does Rotten Tomatoes give this film?
So the tomometer says it's a 42%, and the audience score gives it a 92%.
That's quite a disparity.
It is a massive disparity.
Wow.
It's the star power of Nick Jonas. We got all the Disney Channel fans coming in to watch Midway.
True. Well, very good.
So during this part of the show, Charles, I know you already spoke a little bit about things museums got going on or coming up, but if there's anything you'd like to share or push for the museum, the floor is yours, and have at it.
All right, let me see here. Calendar. All right. Because we do have some events coming up in the museum. Let's see. Here we go. So I know that this next weekend of November 11th, which is also Veterans Day, by the way, there will be a lecture on B-17s. Now, currently the museum does not have a B-17. There are rumors that we are getting a B-17 that is going to have to be restored. It's in pretty rough shape somewhere, but they're eventually going to restore it, and there is an expansion for the hangar. The main hangar is going to double in size, and that's where they're going to put the B-17. But there will be a lecture of that. I think it's at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 11th of this month.
All right, and then you also have the big event is the air show that's popping up next year.
Correct. The weekend of August. Let me get that date. It'll be the 17th and the 18th of August 2024. There will be a 2-day air show. I do know a little insider tip. Last year, the air show was so incredibly popular, rather, that the number of guests overwhelmed the system for getting people in. People were waiting for 3 hours to get in. There was probably 20,000 people getting into the gates for the air show. They did correct it. They had some other organization called, I think it's called Colorado Springs Sports Corps, and the next day they fixed it. But they actually had so many people, and this is near the entrance to the Colorado Springs Airport, that people's flights were delayed because they couldn't get people into the airport. It was so backed up. So this year, this year they're going to limit each day to 15,000 people. So, and
That is crazy.
only 15,000. So, so it's pretty impressive. It's over. There's a place at the Colorado Springs Airport where the Army, military forces have a special loading unloading area for flights coming from overseas, soldiers and military personnel returning from overseas. And it's a huge tarmacked area, probably about a half a mile by a quarter of a mile wide, and it's but you have to walk in, and it's a little bit of a hike, and you have to go through security, of course, to get there. But that will be the 17th and 18th of August, and the Blue Angels will be there for both days.
Nice. Well, that's definitely we'll have to put onto the calendar. Maybe with enough planning and foresight, we can see if me and Jack can come down together and do that.
Great. Yeah. Where are you at, Jack? Where do you live at?
South Dakota, Pier,
Oh wow.
the capital.
Okay. That's good.
I mean,
Ever been?
if you can call it that.
Shut up.
The largest town. One thing that's up.
No, that's Sioux Falls.
There is one thing out there. It's in Wyoming, but I didn't know about this, and I read the Gazette daily. It's the local paper here, but it is actually another national museum near this town. It's in a town called Dubois. Du Bois. It's Dois. It's the National Military Vehicle Museum. Let me make sure I get this right here. Military vehicle. Yes, Du Bois. So it's DU. Where are we at here? Dubois. Du Bois. So it's near kind of like the south entrance of Yellowstone National Park. It is actually one of the most incredible museums I've seen. The story behind this was a guy who had a ton of money from like some kind of medical sales product. He started collecting tanks, and he had so many in his yard, people would stop by and say, "Can I just look at your tanks?" And now it's what was the square footage here? It was something ridiculous.
Oh, I think I've heard of this, but it's going to be like this massive facility.
It is a massive. It's 500 vehicles there now. It is literally the largest collection of military vehicles in the world. It walks you through pre-World War II, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and they're opening up like a Cold War section. They've got more tanks than they have room for. It's out of the way. I mean, it's literally in the middle of nowhere. But I mean, being from South Dakota, you could drive by it on the way in or something. So, but it's something if you have a chance to do it, yeah, I would definitely check it out because it was and it's one of the museums. It's almost interactive. You could get right up and close to these vehicles. They have them set up almost in like a diorama mode, where they're like you have a Huey with a shadow of the blade spinning around and the sounds of a helicopter. So it's really well presented. I was very impressed with this museum.
It's definitely a bucket list item, just like your museum. For those who haven't had the chance to go to this place, I've been there myself. It is an impressive place. Highly recommend it. Um, I went there for maybe like 2.5, 3 hours, and I felt like I didn't have enough time there. So you can, there's plenty of stuff to see there, and it's one of the few museums where you can get up close and personal with the subject matter. So if you ever find yourself in Colorado Springs, go and check out the National World War II Aviation Museum. Did I say that order correctly?
Yes, the National Museum of
Okay.
yeah, it's the National Museum of World War II Aviation. Um,
All right. It's a mouthful, but
yeah, we just call it the Airplane Museum, basically. And the other,
yeah, that
yeah, the other interesting thing, if you want to, if you're in town, there's the Airplane Restaurant, which, in case people have never been here in town, there is it's basically a modified B-29 bomber that was the Boeing designed as an in-fuel tanker, and they designed a restaurant in it and around it, and it's right around the corner from the museum itself. So, and the museum and the restaurant's full of airplanes and historical pictures of the Colorado Springs airport, and it's a great place to go because it's literally less than a half a mile from the museum, and it's airplane themed.
all right. So, Jack, I believe next film is your choice.
Hmm. That's a good question. Didn't really put much thought into that. How about I get back to you on that?
Okay. Next week's movie is it's going to be a secret.
Yeah, secret.
We totally planned it that way.
Yep.
Okay. For those of you who, if you enjoyed the show, please leave a review for the show. The stars do matter. Uh, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at the Armchair Commanders Podcast. Give us a follow, like, heart, what have you over there. We also have a YouTube channel, which is under the name History Apprentice. We have a Discord that we would love to have you all join, which is also under our podcast name, where we're hoping to incorporate live viewing sessions. Jack, do you have anything else?
I do not.
All right. Well, it has been a pleasure having you, Charles. Until next week, I've been John,
And I'm Jack.
and we will catch you next time. Say it, Jack.
Bye.